The Galactic Council chamber was the largest structure ever built by any species in the known universe. It floated in the empty space between three dead stars, a monument to peace and order that had stood for 12,000 years. Inside its great hall, representatives from 847 different species gathered to discuss the matters of the galaxy. They had rules for everything. They had procedures that took centuries to develop. They believed with complete certainty that their way of doing things was the only way that worked. Ambassador Krelvax of the Dominion stood before the assembly with a data pad in his long gray fingers. He was tall, nearly 3 m, with skin like wet stone and eyes that glowed a soft yellow. His species, the Velari, were known throughout the galaxy as warriors and conquerors, though the Council preferred to call them integration specialists. The survey team has returned from Sector 7742. Krelvax announced. His voice echoed through the chamber. They have found a new species on the third planet of a small yellow star. The locals call their world Earth. A murmur passed through the assembly. New species were always interesting, at least for a moment. Show us, said the High Speaker, being made entirely of light, who had held the position for 3,000 years. The chamber darkened and a hologram appeared in the center of the room. It showed a blue and green planet, beautiful in its way, spinning slowly. The darkness of space. The image zoomed in to show cities, vehicles, and the creatures who had built them. They were small things, these humans, soft skin, no natural weapons, laughably short lives. They had split their world into nearly 200 different nations that could barely cooperate with each other. Their technology is primitive, Krelvax continued. They have achieved basic space flight but have not left their own system. They have nuclear weapons but have only used them twice in war. They spend most of their resources fighting each other over land, resources, and ideas. Laughter rippled through the chamber. The representatives of ancient species found it amusing that these creatures thought their tiny conflicts mattered. What is your assessment? The High Speaker asked. Precedent Class 7. Standard integration protocols should be sufficient. They pose no threat to Council interests. The High Speaker considered this for a moment. The Velari Dominion has requested new territory for expansion. This system falls within acceptable parameters. Does anyone object to authorizing integration? No one did. Why would they? This had happened thousands of times before. A young species was found, evaluated, and brought into the galactic community. Whether they wanted it or not, the process was sometimes messy, but it always ended the same way. The young species learned their place, and the galaxy continued as it always had. Authorization granted. The High Speaker declared. The Valfari Dominion may proceed with integration of the Sol system. Standard rules apply. Minimize destruction of infrastructure where possible. We expect a full report within one planetary rotation. Krelvax bowed deeply. The Dominion is grateful for this opportunity. We will bring these humans into the fold quickly. As he left the chamber, Krelvax felt something close to excitement. His people had not conducted an integration in nearly a century. The younger warriors were eager to prove themselves. This would be good for morale. 3 weeks later, the Velari fleet entered the Sol system. There were 47 ships in total. The Smallest was the size of a human. Aircraft carrier, the largest Krelvex's command vessel could have, held a small city inside its hull. They emerged from faster than light travel, just past the orbit of Mars, and began their approach to Earth. On the planet below, chaos erupted immediately. Every telescope, every satellite, every radar system on Earth detected the approaching fleet. Governments scrambled to respond. But what could they do? Their most powerful weapons were nuclear missiles, designed to destroy cities, not spacecraft moving at impossible speeds. The United Nations called an emergency session. Military leaders around the world woke their presidents and prime ministers with the worst news in human history. Ordinary people looked up at the sky and felt for the first time truly small. Krelvex broadcast his message on every frequency humans used for communication. It appeared on every television, every radio, every phone on the planet. People of Earth, I am Ambassador Krelvex of the Villari Dominion, acting under the authority of the Galactic Council. Your species has been selected for integration into galactic civilization. This is not a negotiation. You will surrender all military assets immediately. You will accept Dominion governance of your world. Resistance will result in consequences. You have one planetary rotation to comply. The message ended. Earth had 24 hours to give up everything it had ever built. The response came faster than Krelvex expected. It came from 100 different nations speaking 100 different languages, but they all said the same thing. No, some responses were polite, some were filled with fear, some contained words that needed no translation, but none of them contained surrender. Krelvex was not surprised. This happens sometimes with young species. They did not yet understand what they faced. Demonstration would be necessary. He selected 3 targets, cities large enough to make an impact, but not so large that their destruction would significantly reduce the planet's productivity. His tactical officers calculated the optimal strike pattern at exactly midnight Greenwich Mean Time. 3 beams of pure energy descended from orbit. Mumbai, Sao Paulo, Chicago. 37 million people died in less than 3 seconds. The beams left craters. Neighborhoods had stood. The shock waves flattened everything for kilometers in every direction. Fires burned that would not stop for weeks. The lucky ones died instantly. The unlucky ones lived long enough to understand what had happened. On every screen on Earth, Krelvex appeared again. You were warned. Further resistance will result in further demonstrations. You now have 12 hours to comply. This is your final warning. The governments of Earth went silent. What could they say? What could they do? Their missiles could not reach the ships in orbit. Their aircraft could not fly high enough to fight. Their soldiers could not shoot at enemies they could not touch. In the Galactic Council chamber far away among the dead stars, the representatives received word that Earth integration was proceeding as expected. They made a note in their records and moved on to other business. Another young species learning its place in the universe. Nothing unusual at all. But something unusual was happening on Earth, something the Council had never seen before in 12,000 years of galactic civilization. Humans were not giving up. In bunkers beneath mountains, military leaders who had been enemies yesterday now shared everything they knew. Nuclear Launch codes were exchanged between nations that had pointed those same weapons at each other for decades. Scientists who had competed for funding and fame now worked together without a single thought of credit or glory. In the ruins of Mumbai, a teenage girl pulled her younger brother from the rubble and promised him that someone would pay for what happened. In Sao Paulo, an old man who had survived two dictatorships looked up at the sky and began planning. In what remained of Chicago, a firefighter who had lost her entire family walked into a recruiting station and demanded to know how she could fight. Across the planet. Billions of humans felt the same emotion at the same moment. It was not despair, it was not surrender, it was something they Valari had never encountered in any species they had integrated. It was rage, cold, patient, absolute rage. 12 hours passed. Earth did not surrender. The Valari began landing troops in every major city, expecting the humans to bow their heads and accept their fate. Instead, they found a population that looked them in the eyes and said nothing at all. Krelvek reported to the council that integration was proceeding smoothly, resistance was minimal, the humans were cooperating. He did not report the strange feeling he got when he walked through the occupied cities. He did not mention how the humans watched his soldiers with eyes that held something he could not quite identify. He did not describe the absolute silence that fell whenever he entered a room. He should have, because those watching humans were not broken. They were studying, learning, waiting. The Galactic Council believed the matter was settled. They believed Earth would become another quiet member of their civilization, its people working and paying tribute like all the others before them. They believed that 12,000 years of history had taught them everything they needed to know about young species. They were wrong, and in 1 year they would learn exactly how wrong they had been. 13 months after the invasion, the Galactic Council received its routine report from the Velari Occupation Force. On Earth, the report was short and boring, exactly as expected. Human productivity levels were acceptable. Resource extraction was ahead of schedule. Resistance incidents had dropped to nearly zero. The integration was complete. The Council filed the report and forgot about Earth entirely. They had more important matters to discuss: trade disputes between the merchant clans, a territorial disagreement near the galactic rim, the usual business of running a civilization that spanned 1,000,000 worlds. If they had looked more closely at the report, they might have noticed something strange. The resistance incidents had not just dropped, they had stopped completely all at once. Exactly 6 months after the invasion began, every species the Council had ever integrated showed a gradual decline in resistance. Over years, humans had simply stopped fighting overnight. None of the Council members thought to ask why on earth. The answer to that question lived in the darkness beneath the surface. The old subway tunnels of Moscow had been abandoned for 30 years before the invasion. Now they held 2,000 people working in 3 shifts, 24 hours a day. They called themselves the Foundation, though they never wrote that name down anywhere. Their leader was General Yuri Vyulov, a 73-year-old man who had fought in 3 wars and buried 2 wives. He had silver hair, cold blue eyes, and a mind that never stopped planning. When the invasion began, Vyulov had been in a bunker reviewing missile defense systems that could not defend Against anything in orbit, he watched. The cities burn on his monitors, he saw. The Velari troops land in perfect formation, he understood faster than most that conventional resistance was suicide, so he ordered his people underground, all of them, every soldier, every scientist, every engineer who could be reached. They took everything they could carry and disappeared into the tunnels beneath the frozen Russian Earth. 6 months later, he sent a message to every resistance cell on the planet. The message contained one word: wait. And humanity waited. In a converted factory basement outside Berlin, Dr. Annika Weiss led a team of physicists studying a piece of Velari armor that a brave young man had died to steal. Armor was impossibly light and impossibly strong. It should not have existed according to everything they knew about material science. Annika spent 3 months just trying to understand how to cut a sample small enough to study. She went through 4 diamond-tip saws and 2 laser cutters before she found the frequency that made the material vulnerable. When she finally cracked it open, she wept, not from joy, but from understanding. The Velari were not gods, they were just people with better tools, and tools could be copied. 6,000 kilometers away, in a cave system beneath the mountains of northern India, a 24-year-old engineer named Priya Sharma stared at a Velari shield generator. Her team had captured it during a raid that cost them 11 lives. Priya had promised the dead that their sacrifice would mean something. The shield generator was beautiful in its complexity. It created a barrier of energy that could stop anything humans could throw at it. Bullets, explosions, even nuclear radiation simply bounced away. The Velari soldiers walked through human cities completely protected, laughing at any attempt to harm them. Priya took the generator apart piece by piece, documenting everything. She worked for 6 weeks without sleeping more than 4 hours at a time. She lost weight, her hair began falling out from stress. But she kept working because every night when she closed her eyes, she saw the faces of those 11 people who had died to bring her this machine. On the 43rd day, she found it, a tiny fluctuation in the shield harmonics that occurred exactly once every 1.7 seconds. The fluctuation lasted less than a millisecond, but it was there, a gap in the armor, a moment of vulnerability. Priya wrote her findings in a code that only General Vilov could read, and sent them through a network of messengers who traveled on foot to avoid detection. 2 months later, the first human-made shield disruptors entered production in a factory beneath Sao Paulo, built in the crater where 3 million people had died. Not every breakthrough came from scientists. In what used to be Oklahoma, a 16-year-old girl named Maya Chen discovered something by accident. She had been a radio enthusiast before the invasion, building equipment in her garage and talking to strangers around the world. Now she hid in a storm cellar with her grandmother, listening to Velari communications with jury-rigged equipment. The Velari used faster than light communication for important messages, but for routine chatter their soldiers used standard radio frequencies. Maya listened to them for months, learning their language by pure immersion. She was good at languages. She had spoken 3 before the invasion, now she spoke 4. One night, she noticed something odd. Every time a Velari ship entered or left the atmosphere, there was a burst of static. on a specific frequency. She tracked the pattern for weeks. The static always came exactly 3.22 seconds before the ship's engines activated, but she wrote it down and passed the information to a resistance contact who passed it to another who eventually got it to a former NASA engineer hiding in the Appalachian Mountains. He understood immediately. The Velari FTL drives had a warm-up phase. During that phase they were vulnerable to interference. If you hit them with the right frequency at exactly the right moment, the drive would fail. The ship would not explode or crash. It simply would not go anywhere. It took another 3 months to turn that discovery into a weapon, but eventually hidden factories around the world began producing devices that could ground any Vari ship within range. Above the surface, the occupation continued. Velari soldiers patrolled the streets of every major city. Human workers went to their jobs in Vithari-owned factories. Resources flowed off-planet to feed the endless hunger of the Dominion. Everything looked exactly as the Council expected, but the Velari occupation force began to notice small things that did not add up. Production at human factories was exactly at quota, not above, not below, exactly at the required level every single day. This should have been impossible. Natural variation alone should have caused fluctuations, but the numbers were perfect, too perfect. Human workers arrived on time, did their jobs, and went home. They never complained. They never fought. They never did anything wrong, but they also never did anything extra. They followed orders with absolute precision and not 1 ounce more. The soldiers on patrol reported that humans no longer ran away when they approached. Instead, they simply moved aside, watching with calm eyes that revealed nothing. Some soldiers found this more unsettling than open resistance would have been. Kavax received these reports but dismissed them as the nervousness of young warriors unused to occupation duty. Humans were behaving exactly as conquered species always behaved. The strange perfection of their compliance was simply their culture. Different species adapted in different ways. He did not know about the tunnels beneath Moscow, Berlin, Mumbai, Sao Paulo, and 100 other cities. He did not know about the factories hidden in caves and basement producing weapons that his people had never imagined. He did not know about the network of messengers carrying information across continents, on foot, bicycle, and horseback, completely invisible to surveillance. He did not know that every human who walked past his soldiers was counting them, memorizing patrol routes, noting which weapons they carried and how they held them, identifying which ones were alert and which ones had grown careless. He did not know that humanity had not surrendered. Humanity had simply gone quiet while it prepared. In his underground headquarters, General Vyulov reviewed the final reports from cells around the world. They had enough shield disruptors to equip every combat team. They had FTL jammers positioned near every landing zone. They had captured and studied enough Velari weapons to produce their own versions. They had mapped every patrol route, every supply line, every communication node the enemy used. Most importantly, they had people, millions of them, farmers and teachers and office workers who had spent 13 months pretending to be broken while they trained in secret. They were not professional soldiers, but they were angry and they were ready. Vyulov looked At the calendar on his wall, tomorrow would mark exactly 1 year since the cities burned. It seemed fitting. He picked up his radio and spoke the words that would change history. All cells, all stations, Operation Midnight. Sun is authorized. Begin at midnight. Local time. May God forgive us for what we are about to do around the world in tunnels and basement and hidden bunkers. Humanity heard the order. They check their weapons one last time. They hugged their loved ones. They said prayers to whatever gods they believed in, and then they climbed toward the surface, toward the enemy who had thought them broken, toward the fight they had been waiting 13 months to begin. The Valfari occupation force went asleep that night, confident and comfortable. They had no idea that they would not see another sunrise. The first Valari outpost to fall was a supply depot. Northern Canada. The attack came at exactly midnight local time, just as General Villeneuve had ordered. 47 human fighters emerged from the forest. Their weapons equipped with shield disruptors that Priya Sharma had designed in a cave 6,000 km away. The Valari guards did not even have time to raise an alarm. Their personal shields flickered and died 3 seconds before the first shots were fired. By the time they understood what was happening, it was already over. The entire outpost fell in under 4 minutes. No distress signal was sent. The humans had made sure of that. 12 time zones away, the same scene repeated itself outside Moscow, then Berlin, then Tokyo, then Sydney, then Mumbai, in the shadow of the crater where 3 million people had died 1 year ago. Attacks were perfectly coordinated. Each one struck exactly at midnight in its local time zone, which meant the wave of destruction rolled around the planet like the shadow of the Earth itself. Valari command structure did not even realize anything was wrong for almost 2 hours. Their communication network was so large that missing a few routine check-ins was normal. When they finally understood that something terrible was happening, it was already too late. Commander Vexrath was the highest ranking Valari officer on Earth. He was sleeping in his quarters in the main occupation headquarters, a massive building that used to be the United Nations complex in New York, when his aide burst through the door. Commander, we have lost contact with 37 outposts. Vexrath sat up confused. Equipment failure all at the same time? No, sir. We are receiving reports of weapons fire from the outposts we can still reach. The humans are attacking all at once. Vexrath felt something he had not felt in decades of military service, fear. He ran to the command center, still wearing his sleeping clothes. The tactical display showed a nightmare. Red indicators marked lost or contested positions. There were hundreds of them, spreading across every continent like a disease. Human forces were hitting supply depots, communication towers, vehicle stations, and troop barracks. They seemed to know exactly where to strike and exactly when the defenses were weakest. How is this possible? Vexrath demanded. Our surveillance detected no buildup, no communications. Nothing. Unknown, sir. The humans appear to have organized this entirely without using any technology we could monitor. Then use what you can. Send reinforcements to the major positions. Call down orbital strikes on any concentration of enemy forces. Sir, our orbital platforms are not responding. What do you mean they are not responding? I mean they are there, sir. We can see them, but they will not answer our calls or follow our commands. 800 kilometers above the Earth, a very different kind of battle was taking place. The Velari Orbital Command Station held 500 personnel and enough firepower to glass a continent. It was the key to controlling the planet as long as the station remained in Velari hands. Any human resistance could be crushed from above. This was why General Vulov had made it the primary target. The assault team consisted of 12 humans who had spent 6 months training for this single mission. They had reached orbit aboard a captured Velari shuttle piloted by a former astronaut who had learned to fly alien ships by studying wreckage. They had approached the station, broadcasting friendly identification code stolen by Maya Chen and her network of radio listeners. The station security systems saw a routine supply shuttle requesting permission to dock. They granted it without a second thought. The 12 humans entered the station. Through the cargo bay, they moved. Through the corridors with weapons. They had built themselves weapons that could punch through Velari armor. Now that they understood its weaknesses, they killed quickly and quietly, room by room, corridor by corridor. It took them 47 minutes to reach the command center. The station commander died trying to send a warning to the fleet. His last words were cut short by a bullet from a weapon that should not have existed. The leader of the assault team, a woman named Sarah Okonkwo, who had lost her entire family in the Chicago attack, sat down at the main control console. She had spent 8 months learning to operate Velari systems from captured equipment. Now she put that knowledge to use. First she locked out all communication with the surface, then she aimed every weapon on the station at the Velari fleet in high orbit. The ships never saw the attack coming. Their shields were down, their crews sleeping or relaxing. The station's weapons tore through them like paper. In the first 60 seconds, Sarah destroyed 9 warships and damaged 15 more. The surviving ships scattered, trying to escape, trying to understand what was happening. Some managed to raise their shields, some tried to return fire, but Sarah had already anticipated this. She had programmed the station's defenses to create a protective barrier around the planet. Any ship that tried to approach was met with overwhelming firepower. On the surface, Vexreth watched his fleet die. In the sky above him, he could see the explosions through the window of his command center, bright flashes that lit up the night like new stars being born. His entire support structure was being systematically eliminated. "Get me Ambassador Krelvax," he ordered. "Get me the Council, get me anyone who can send help. Sir All Longrain. Communication is being jammed. We cannot reach anyone outside the system." Maya Chen had figured out how to do that. 2. Her network had positioned FTL jammers at every point where Velari ships might try to send a signal. The Sol system was now completely cut off from the rest of the galaxy. Earth was alone with its invaders, and the invaders were losing. The ground war raged for 3 days. Human forces attacked without pause, without mercy, without any of the hesitation the Velari had expected from a primitive species. They used weapons copied from Velari designs, shields built from stolen technology, and tactics that no galactic species had ever seen before. The humans did not fight like soldiers, they fought like each battle was personal, because for them it was Every fighter in the human resistance knew someone who had died in the initial attacks, parents, children, friends, lovers. They carried those names with them into every battle. They whispered them before pulling triggers. They screamed them while charging positions that should have been impossible to take. Vexrath tried to organize a defense, but his forces were scattered and confused. The humans seemed to know where every unit was stationed, where every supply cache was hidden, which roads were safe and which were death traps. They had spent a year watching and learning. Now they used that knowledge to devastating effect. On the second day, human forces captured 2 intact Velari warships that had made emergency landings. Engineers who had never seen a spacecraft before learned to operate them in hours. By nightfall, those ships were flying combat missions against their former owners. On the third day, Vexrath received word that his headquarters was surrounded. Human forces controlled every approach. Reinforcement was impossible. Retreat was impossible. He had 10,000 soldiers left, trapped in a building that was rapidly running out of power and supplies. A human officer approached under a white flag. She was young, maybe 30 years old, with burned scars on her face and eyes that held no hatred, only exhaustion. She delivered a simple message: surrender now and your soldiers will be treated humanely. You will be given food, water, medical care, and eventually transport off this planet. Continue fighting and we will show you the same mercy you showed Mumbai, Sao Paulo, and Chicago. Vexrath looked at the young woman for a long time. He thought about his warriors, many of them barely adults, who had expected an easy occupation and found a nightmare instead. He thought about the reports of human prisoner camps where captured Velari were given clean beds and 3 meals a day, treatment that violated every rule of war he had ever known. He thought about what the council would say when they learned that a pre-ascended species had defeated the Valfari Dominion. Then he gave the order to surrender. The humans did not celebrate. There was too much work to do, too many dead to bury, too much destruction to repair. But that night, for the first time in over a year, people looked up at the sky without fear. The orbital station, now under human control, broadcast a message on every frequency the galaxy used. The message was simple, translated into every language the Vari had taught them. This is Earth. We were attacked without provocation. We have defended ourselves. To the Galactic Council, we do not want war. We want to be left alone. Do not send more ships. Do not send more soldiers. Earth is not available for integration. If you respect this boundary, we will have peace. If you do not, you will learn what the Velari learned. We are not a species that surrenders. We are not a species that forgets. The message ended with coordinates for a diplomatic meeting if the council wanted one. Then the humans went back to rebuilding their world, watching the stars and waiting to see what would happen next. In the Galactic Council chamber, far away among the dead stars, the message arrived like a bomb, exploding in the middle of a formal dinner. No one knew what to say. No one knew what to do. For the first time in 12,000 years, the Council had no precedent to follow. The Galactic Council chamber had seen many crises in its 12,000 years of existence: wars between member species, plagues that wiped out entire worlds, natural disasters that reshaped solar systems, But never in all that time had the chamber fallen into complete silence. Quite like this. The high speaker floated at the center of the hall, her form of living light dimmer than usual, as if even she could not process what she had just heard. Around her, 847 representatives sat motionless there, minds struggling to accept the impossible news. The Velari Dominion had been defeated, not just defeated but rooted, humiliated, driven from a planet by a species that should not have been able to build weapons capable of scratching Velari armor. The message from Earth was playing on every screen. In the chamber, that calm human voice explaining what had happened and what they expected. Ambassador Krelvac stood before the assembly, his gray skin now pale with shame. He had escaped Earth on the last shuttle to leave the surface, moments before human forces captured the spaceport. He had lost everything, his fleet, his army, his honor. How? The high speaker finally asked. How is this possible? Krelvex could not meet her eyes. We underestimated them. High speaker, we saw primitive technology and assumed primitive minds. We were wrong. Wrong. Representative Jacksville of the merchant plans rose from his seat, his voice sharp with anger. You lost 47 warships to a species that had never left its own moon. You lost an orbital station to 12 soldiers with hand weapons. You were not wrong, Ambassador. You were incompetent. The high speaker began. Representative Jacksville, please. No, the Dominion promised us a simple integration. They promised us resources, labor, a new colony for the Council's benefit. Instead, they have given us a disaster. The message from Earth is being broadcast on every frequency in the galaxy. Every species can hear it. Every prescendent world is listening to a story about how the mighty Velari were beaten by farmers and teachers with stolen weapons. The chamber erupted into shouting. Factions that had maintained polite relations for centuries now turned on each other. The Vari demanded support for a massive retaliation. The merchant clans demanded compensation for lost trade. Dozens of smaller species simply demanded to know what would happen next. The high speaker raised her luminous hand, and slowly the chamber fell quiet. We must address this situation carefully. The humans have requested a diplomatic meeting. They claim they want peace. Perhaps we should listen. Admiral Vorkith of the Hegemony Fleet stepped forward. His species were warriors like the Voltari, but older and more powerful. His ships were the enforcement arm of the Council's will. High speaker, with respect, if we negotiate with these humans, we send a message to every Priasis species in the galaxy. We tell them that the Council's authority can be challenged. We tell them that violence works. We cannot allow that message to spread. Then what do you propose? Admiral Vorsit's answer was cold and simple. I have a battle fleet at my disposal, 12 dreadnoughts, each one capable of destroying a planet. I propose we go to Earth and show these humans what happens to species who defy the Council. A murmur of approval ran through portions of the chamber. The idea was appealing in its simplicity. Crush the rebellion, restore order, move on. It had worked countless times before. But not everyone agreed. In the far corner of the chamber, where the eldest species sat in quiet dignity, an ancient being named Fella rose to speak. Her species, the Vascari, had been among the founders of the Council 12,000 years ago. They rarely participated in debates. Any more content to watch and remember. But Fella had seen something in the human message that troubled her, if I may. Speak, high speaker. The chamber fell, silent with a respect that surprised even some of the younger representatives. Fella was nearly 800 years old, one of the oldest living beings in the galaxy. When she spoke, even the high speaker listened. I have studied the recordings. From Earth, Dolores said, her voice soft but clear. I have seen how these humans fought, how they organized, how they adapted. She paused, her ancient eyes scanning the chamber. Do you know what I see when I look at them? No one answered. I see us. I see what we were 12,000 years ago, before we built this council, before we learned to talk instead of fight. She turned to look directly at Admiral Vorkif. I remember, Admiral. Even if you do not, I remember what it was like to be a young species full of anger and fear and the desperate need to survive. I remember the wars we fought before we learned better ways. Vorkath shifted uncomfortably, with respect. Elder, that was a long time ago. Things were different then, were they? These humans lost 37 million people in the first hours of the invasion. They lost 3 of their greatest cities, and instead of surrendering, they spent a year preparing to fight back. Does that sound like a species that will accept defeat? Admiral, does that sound like a species that will bow to threats? It sounds like a species that needs to be taught its place. Fella shook her head slowly. No, it sounds like us, and if we go to Earth with warships and ultimatums, we will not teach them anything except that we are enemies. We will not end the conflict. We will begin a war that could last generations. One primitive planet cannot threaten the Council, Vorkith said dismissively. One planet cannot, but what about 10? What about 50? What about all the pre-ascended species who are listening to Earth's message right now, learning that the Council is not invincible? Fella turned back to the assembly. The humans have done something far more dangerous than defeating the Velari. They have introduced an idea, the idea that resistance is possible, that young species do not have to accept integration, that there is another way. The chamber was silent again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. Understanding was beginning to spread. Representative Jacksville spoke slowly. You are saying that if we destroy Earth, we make them martyrs, and martyrs are more dangerous than living enemies. I am saying that we face a choice, Fella replied. We can try to crush this rebellion with force and watch it spread to every corner of the galaxy, or we can do something we have not done in 12,000 years. We can admit that our way is not the only way. We can treat these humans as equals, not subjects. We can change. Admiral Vorkith laughed bitterly. Chain the entire foundation of galactic civilization because one species got lucky? That is absurd, is it? Fellora smiled, showing teeth that were still sharp despite her age. Tell me, Admiral, what would your ancestors have done if someone had tried to integrate them by force? Would they have surrendered, or would they have fought until the last warrior died? Vorkith opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. He had no answer because he knew exactly what his ancestors would have done. They would have fought just like the humans. The high speaker let the silence stretch for a long moment before speaking. I propose a compromise. We will send a diplomatic envoy to Earth as the humans requested. The envoy will be protected by Admiral Vor's fleet in case the humans prove hostile, but the fleet will not attack unless attacked first. We will talk, we will listen, and we will make no decisions until we understand who these humans truly are. It was not a satisfying answer for anyone. The Velari wanted revenge, the merchant clans wanted compensation, Admiral Vorkith wanted to demonstrate the council's power, and Thelura wanted something that most of the chamber could not even imagine, but it was the answer they got. 2 weeks later, the hegemony fleet entered the solar system. 12 dreadnoughts, each one large enough to be visible from Earth's surface, arranged themselves in a formation that made their firepower impossible to ignore. Behind them came the diplomatic vessel, a smaller ship, carrying representatives from 30 different species. On Earth, humanity watched them approach with weapons ready and fear in their hearts. The past year had cost so much, so many had died, so many cities were still in ruins. They had won against the Velari, but this new fleet was 10 times larger and 100 times more powerful. General Vyulov, now the chairman of the United Planetary Defense Council, received the message requesting permission to send diplomats to the surface. He consulted with leaders from every nation, every resistance cell, every faction that had helped win their freedom. The answer they sent back surprised everyone, including themselves. Permission granted. You may land in Geneva. We look forward to talking. And so, for the first time in history, the Galactic Council would sit across a table from a species that had refused to be conquered. No one knew what would happen next, but everyone knew that whatever came from this meeting would change the galaxy forever. The building where the meeting took place had once been beautiful. It had stood for nearly a century as a symbol of human cooperation, a place where nations came together to solve their problems with words instead of weapons. Now its walls were cracked, its windows shattered, its halls still marked by the scars of orbital bombardment. The humans had chosen this place on purpose. They wanted the council to see what the Velari had done. The delegation from Earth consisted of 12 people, 1 from each of the major regions that had contributed to the resistance. General Vyulov led them, his silver hair now completely white from the stress of the past year. Beside him stood Priya Sharma, the engineer whose discovery had made victory possible. Maya Chen was there too, the teenager who had cracked Velari communications, now 19 years old, and carrying herself with a quiet confidence that made her seem much older. The council delegation was larger and far more impressive. 30 representatives from 30 species, each one chosen for their importance or their wisdom. Admiral Vorkith came as the military authority, his massive form barely fitting through human doorways. Elder Thelura came as the voice of the oldest species, moving slowly but missing nothing with her ancient eyes. And at their head was Ambassador Zixtal, a being of crystalline structure who had negotiated more treaties than any other member of the council. They met in what had once been the main assembly hall. A large table had been brought in, human-sized chairs on one side, various accommodations for alien bodies on the other. Through the broken windows, everyone could see the hegemony dreadnoughts hanging in the sky, their weapons visible even from the ground. Ambassador Zixtal spoke first, his voice like wind chimes in a storm. We come in peace, General Vyulov. Council seeks to understand what happened here and to find a path forward. That benefits all parties, Vyulov nodded. Slowly, we appreciate your willingness. To talk, please understand that a year ago, beings who claim to represent your council killed 37 million of our people. Without warning, peace is something we will need to see, not just hear. The actions of the Velari Dominion were regrettable, Priya Sharma interrupted, her voice sharp. My mother died in Mumbai, my father, my two sisters, 3 million people in a city that had done nothing wrong, is regrettable. The word you use for genocide. Admiral Vorkuth shifted in his seat, his hand moving toward a weapon that was not there. The humans had insisted that everyone enter unarmed. Elder Fella raised a calming hand. The young one is right to be angry. We should not minimize what was done. The Velari violated the principles of our council. They treated your people as objects to be conquered rather than beings with dignity and rights. For that there can be no adequate apology. We can only offer accountability and change. What kind of accountability? Volav asked. The Vari Dominion will face sanctions. Their integration authority has been revoked permanently. They will pay reparations to Earth for the damage they caused, and Ambassador Krelvix will be turned over to human custody for trial if you wish it. The humans exchanged glances. This was more than they had expected, but Vyulov was not finished. And what about the next time? What happens when another member of your council decides that Earth looks like an easy target? Ambassador Zixel leaned forward, his crystalline body catching the light from the broken windows. That is what we are here to discuss. The council would like to offer Earth membership, full membership with all the rights and protections that implies no species that belongs to the council may be attacked by another member. Your world would be safe, and in exchange, you would agree to follow council laws and contribute to council efforts just as every other member does. You would open trade with galactic markets. You would share your technology and receive ours in return. It was a generous offer. By council standards, most species would have accepted immediately, but Vyulov had spent the past year learning that the council's generosity always came with hidden costs. What about other species? Like us, he asked, other pre-ascendant worlds that are being integrated right now as we speak. Zixtel hesitated. I do not understand the question. I think you do. Your council has been conquering young species for 12,000 years. You call it integration, but we know what it really is. You find worlds that cannot fight back and you take them. We are asking what happens to them if we join your club. Admiral Vork spoke for the first time, his voice a deep rumble. Integration process exists to bring young species into civilization safely. Without guidance, they might destroy themselves or become threats to others. The way we became a threat to you. Vorkif had no answer for that. Elder Fella leaned forward. You are asking the right questions, General, questions that many of us have been afraid to ask for a very long time. The truth is that integration was never meant to be what it has become. When the council was founded, we helped young species because they needed help. Somewhere along the way, we began to help ourselves instead. We took their resources, their labor, their freedom, and told ourselves we were doing them a favor. You admit this? Volkov seemed genuinely surprised. I am very old, General. I have seen enough to know that refusing to admit Uncomfortable truths does not make them less true. Your people have forced us to look at ourselves clearly for the first time in millennia. Some of us do not like what we see. The negotiations continued for 3 days. They argued about trade agreements and territorial boundaries, about reparations and mutual defense. They argued about things that would have seemed impossible just a year ago. 2 civilizations trying to find common ground across a gulf of technology, culture, and history. But the real breakthrough came on the evening of the second day. Maya Chen had been quiet throughout most of the discussions, overwhelmed by the presence of beings she had only heard as voices on stolen radio frequencies. But when the talk turned to communication networks, she spoke up. Your message from Earth has been received by 47 pre-ascended species, she said. I know because I have been monitoring the frequencies they use. They are talking about what happened here. They are asking questions about the council. Some of them are already organizing resistance movements of their own. The council delegates looked at each other with something close to panic. This was exactly what they had feared. You see, Admiral Vorat said, this is why we cannot show weakness. If we give Earth what they want, every young species will think they can do the same. Or Maya continued, you could give those species what they really want, the same thing we wanted, the chance to develop on their own terms, at their own pace, without someone forcing them to be something they are not. That would require changing everything. Zixtel said. Yes, Maya agreed. It would. The final agreement was signed on the third day in a ceremony broadcast to every corner of the galaxy. Earth would join the council, not as an integrated subject, but as a sovereign member with full rights and protections. In exchange, Earth would help create a new category of membership for developing species, one that offered guidance without coercion and protection without domination. It was called the Chen Protocol, named after the 19-year-old girl who had spent a year listening to alien radio and came away understanding more about galactic politics than diplomats who had studied it for centuries. As the delegations prepared to leave, Elder Fella approached General Vyulov. She moved slowly, her ancient body showing every one of her 800 years. You have changed everything, she said. You know that? Yes. Valov looked out the broken window at the ships in the sky and the ruins of the city around them. We just wanted to survive. That is how change always begins, she said, with survival, with the desperate need to keep existing despite everything that would destroy you. She placed a gentle hand on his arm. I was there when my people first reached the stars. We were much like you then, angry, frightened, determined. We made many mistakes, but we also built something that lasted 12,000 years. Now you will help us build something new, something better, perhaps. You think we can? I think you already have. The question is what you will do next. She smiled, showing those ancient, sharp teeth. Do not let the galaxy change you, General. You should be the ones changing the galaxy. She walked away, leaving Vyulov alone with his thoughts. Outside, the citizens of Geneva were emerging from their shelters to see the alien ships departing. Children pointed at the sky, their fear slowly transforming into wonder. Parents held each other, crying tears of relief and hope and grief for all they had lost. Maya Chen stood among them, looking up at the stars that were no longer quite so terrifying, Priya Sharma was already heading back to her laboratory, her mind full of new technologies to study and adapt. Across the planet, billions of humans were learning that they were no longer alone in the universe, and that being not alone did not have to mean being conquered. General Vyulov stepped out of the ruined building and took a deep breath of air that still smelled faintly of smoke and ash. A reporter approached him, camera ready, asking for a statement. He thought for a long moment about everything they had been through, the attacks, the occupation, the year of silent preparation, the battles, the deaths, and now this, a seat at the table of galactic civilization, earned through blood and sacrifice and stubborn human refusal to accept defeat. We came from nothing, he said finally. We had no ships, no weapons, no knowledge of what we faced. They thought we were primitive. They thought we would break. He looked up at the departing fleet, getting smaller every moment. They were wrong, and now we have a chance to help. Make sure no other species ever faces what we faced. What happens next? General Vyulov smiled, the first real smile he had allowed himself in over a year. Next we rebuild, we learn, we grow, and we make sure that the next time someone looks at a young species and sees easy prey, they remember what happened to those who made that mistake. With Earth, he turned and walked back into the building where the first meetings of humanity's galactic future were already beginning. Above the planet, the last council ships vanished into faster-than-light travel, carrying news of the impossible victory back to a million worlds. And on those worlds, in the hidden places where young species dreamed of freedom, a new hope was taking root. The galaxy would never be the same. Humanity was just getting started.